introduction. So pretty much everybody that's going to be talking today, you have Jenn, our intermediate designer, Mahsa, our senior designer, Jackie, the director of UX, and myself will be taking you through this entire case study. And the purpose, which Paul went over just now, is to review the case study about UX and marketing collaboration at ecobee with a specific focus on the launch of the Smart Baby Monitor. It's a niche topic in terms of UX and marketing working together, but one that's not often covered, and we figured it would actually be useful to deviate from the norm. So with that being said, we figured, high level, we'll do a quick introduction of who we are, how we used to work, the respective evolution, the current workflow, our new approaches, and what we're doing moving forward. So with that being said, just a quick rundown in terms of who ecobee is in case anyone's unfamiliar with the company. So established in 2007, it's a Canadian company headquartered in Toronto, designed and built the world's first smart thermostat. Today, we create smart home solutions powered by ecobee sensor technology, voice, machine learning, and AI to help customers control their home comfort and energy consumption. And to really appreciate the evolution of this process, we just wanted to take a quick second to highlight where we're coming from, and I'll leave that in Jackie's very capable hands.
Hi, so I'm going to talk about how we used to work. Okay. So when it came to collaboration, there were clear areas of ownership between marketing and product. And so one thing that I want to mention is the ecobee website. This was really evident in the most important touch point where customers look and shop for our products. So when it came to designing the ecobee website, back then the product team owned the entire website, and this included everything from the value props, content, to the flow. And marketing really housed all the creative assets that were going to be used on the site. So the level of collaboration here was really transactional. And so as a designer, what you were really given was just a set of creative assets without much context for its use or the meaning that the images were meant to convey or how they would tie back to value propositions. And so what you're left is trying to shoehorn these images into the layout to try to make use of it. And that can be really challenging. And then what happens is you have 4 teams essentially trying to design different aspects of the customer journey, but you don't have the right touch points in place to ensure that there's alignment. But over time, this process did evolve and it did get better. So I want to talk about the next iteration of this process. So the next iteration of the website, we did improve in the sense that the digital team working on it, they worked directly with the art directors. And so how this improved was that they ended up storyboarding the images needed to create assets that really supported the content. So these storyboards and the value propositions that we wanted to communicate really informed the direction of the lifestyle photography shoots. So this created a much more harmonious narrative of the story, with images that actually made sense with the copy. So in essence, the content really informed the design. So with this, there were several improvements. One of them, of course, is we don't have stock photography in our site. So we have 100% ownable content. Next, we storyboarded custom photography. So as you can see on our current website, everything looks fantastic. And we also have better communication of features with appropriate creative assets. And lastly, we have a way more harmonious narrative that we're trying to tell with our products. But despite these improvements, there were actually still a ton of issues with this approach. So I'll go ahead and talk about the problem, even though it had its improvements. So one thing that happened was that product and the UX team were actually involved really late into the process. So there was no time to incorporate any of the feedback before the launch. And so what ended up happening was there were a ton of technical inaccuracies and miscommunication about the feature experiences. And this inconsistency wasn't just limited to the website. We found that it was actually dispersed throughout the entire ecosystem itself. And the lack of collaboration between the teams resulted in a pretty incoherent product experience across touchpoints throughout the entire customer journey. And so these were the pain points that we experienced. And now that you've seen how it started, we'll deep dive into how we've evolved the process to where it is today. And after reviewing our case study, we hope that you'll ask yourself, is my UX org working closely enough with marketing? What more can we do to really further collaboration? And what business results can we achieve if we start working together? So I'll pass this along to Mahsa now to talk about how we work today.
Thanks, Jackie. So Jackie told us about some of the existing gaps in our previous process. So at this point, us being designers, we thought this is a great opportunity to exercise our design thinking skills in solving this problem. Basically, we were thinking that once we solve the problem of our cross-functional collaboration, we would end up improving our customers' experiences as well. So before we jump into solutioning and trying to address those gaps, we thought let's actually dive deep and validate the problem and make sure that there is in fact a gap and it's not just some unique cases of inconsistencies. And then next, we also wanted to understand if there is in fact a gap, what is the extent of it? So I'll walk you through what process we use to actually determine the extent. And then next, we wanted to come up with a solution that would work for our team, but as well as every other team that would be involved in our collaboration process. And lastly, we're gonna show you how that process got implemented, and how did we test it, and how did we end up making that a standard throughout our process. So if you go to the next slide, Jackie, yes. So we know that no design challenge really starts until we craft the perfect challenge question. So at this point, we were asking ourselves how much we validate that the experience that we currently offer is consistently delivered at each touch point. So in crafting this question, we were thinking about Conway's law, and we were thinking if the current state of our product is in fact a reflection of the communication structure that we have. So with that mindset, we started validating our problem. So our problem validation had 3 steps. First, we started by interviewing our customer service and as well as the customer service representatives, as well as the quality assurance engineers. So a lot of good things came from this. First of all, at ecobee, we are quite lucky to have access to our customer service team. They are very collaborative and they do like to hear from us. This time what we did was to involve them at very early on in the process. We know that they have this depth of knowledge about the business restrictions that we have, as well as they know firsthand what are the challenges that the customers are experiencing. So by chatting with them, we basically ended up learning a lot about the gaps that we have in our existing experience that we offer. And then in chatting with our QA engineers, we got to simulate multiple scenarios for multiple different user groups. So again, we got to diverge even more and learn about how the experience looks like for different user groups. Next, we talked to different internal stakeholders from different departments, and 2 major good things came from this step of our process. First of all, by talking to different people from departments like marketing, development, firmware, social media, and more, we ended up getting organizational buy-in from them. So now we had a lot more people who were invested in the work that we were doing. But at the same time, each of these stakeholders carry the unique perspective that comes from being involved in a different team. So again, we got to diverge even more. And then lastly, we knew that at this point, we had talked to our customer service colleagues, our quality assurance colleagues, as well as different stakeholders in our company, but we haven't really heard from our users. So we thought by creating a customer journey map, we'd be able to basically look at the experience that our customers have across multiple different touch points, assess whether we are as deliberate as we should be in each touch point with our users, and see that as we are scaling, are we impacting the existing experiences by introducing new experiences. So this is the customer journey map at a glance. I can't share this artifact with you, but what I can do is to walk you through the methodology that we used. So at this point, we knew that the scope of the work that we are doing is quite massive, and we didn't want the customer journey map to prolong our timeline so much that impacts our deliverables. So we chose to focus mainly on the usage phase of the e-commerce customer journey experience. I'm sure most of us are aware, but the customer journey experience starts from the awareness phase and then moves on to consideration, purchase, usage or service, and then ends at advocacy or royalty. So we, for this one, we focused on usage. And also between all of the different products that ecobee offers, we chose to focus on our thermostat, which is our flagship product. This also enabled us to have access to a lot of research that has been previously done by our research team. We are lucky to have a dedicated research team, but they are quite busy. Every team wants them to conduct a study. So what we did, instead of asking them to run a whole new study, is basically asking them to share reusable nuggets of information from all of the previous studies that they've conducted, and we made sure to incorporate those in the customer journey map. And at this point, we had collected a ton of information. So it's just a matter of choosing what categories we want to place them in and how to present them. So the categories were things like different channels, moments, micro moments, unintended consequences, the cognitive load of some steps, the physical load, and more. So at this point, we were able to validate that, in fact, there is a problem. And we had uncovered the what, but not quite the why yet. So collecting all of this information allowed us to uncover multiple opportunities for improvement. And we chose to, instead of addressing those opportunities for improvement, to dive even deeper and try to understand what are the root causes that led us to our current position. And we know to be able to answer that, we need to understand how we currently work together. So we posed two questions to ourselves. The first one being the broader question was, how do we currently work together from discover to deploy? And then next, we had a more focused question, which was basically, what are the gaps in our existing process that led us to the current inefficiency and misalignments that we are experiencing? So to be able to answer these two questions, I started reaching out to different teams to ask about the experience that they have and how they collaborate with different teams. So at ecobee, every team owns a different part of the experience. And as a result of that, each team more or less has a unique experience. A lot of those processes are shared, but a lot of them are unique as well. So by reaching out to different individuals, I started by reaching out to people from the design team, because we are at the center of it all. So I was able to understand what are our working habits, and I was able to map them across discover, define, and deploy, which is our process. And then next, I can show you a format that I used. So basically, I captured each step a decision point, whether depending on the decision that we had made, we would diverge into two different paths. And then I also highlighted the processes that were unique to each team, as well as the ones that were shared. And also, as I was reaching out to different people to gather this information, I also asked them what are the gaps that they're currently experiencing in their process, which was very interesting. We have different teams, everybody is busy with something different, but that was the time that themes started emerging. So then I knew what exactly we should be solving for. So I wanted to walk you through some of the gaps that we identified. These are not all of the gaps, but these are the ones that are relevant to our collaboration with our marketing team. I'm sure a lot of you can relate to having unclear ownership. What we experienced was that each team was focused on meeting their own OKRs and less so on how their work impacts other teams. And then The second gap that we identified was that no seamless experience vision has been identified for the most part. The teams don't really take the time to evaluate how the experience that they're introducing complements the existing touch points that we have, as well as how does it contextually fit in with every other experience that we offer. The third gap was that there is not enough alignment cross-functionally between different teams. So what we noticed was that there is not enough cross-functional communication happening between different individuals who are responsible for the conceptualization, execution, and delivery, which leads to this siloed awareness of the features that we offer. Be it the touch point, a feature, or an release item. What it also meant was that because people had that siloed mentality, they would not take into account how the work that they want to release impacts other teams' capacity. So then there was a lot of last-minute reprioritization. And then lastly, we did not have a standardized process, which meant that we do spend a lot of time repeating past inefficiencies and at times reinvent the wheel over and over again. Another downfall from not having a standardized process was the fact that thinking about the experience cohesively was not an integrated part into the process. It was just more like an afterthought to our team. So we took all of these gaps and we wanted to basically create a workflow that would enable all of these gaps to not exist anymore. And to do so, we came up with a series of principles that would inform our designs as well as guide those collaboration frameworks. And all of this are directly taken from the gaps. I covered the alignment and cross-squad conversations not happening before. The second principle that we had was identification and progression to end state. So one thing that we noticed was that a lot of times we would end up releasing the MVP version, but never follow up on what's the end state. And at times we wouldn't even know what's the end state. We would just focus on the MVP and then forget about everything else altogether and then focus on new features instead of improving the existing ones. So that was something that we wanted to take into account into our new collaboration framework. The third principle that we wanted to focus on was contextual awareness and minimal intrusiveness. So at ecobee, one of our strategic pillars is being a welcome guest in our customer's home. And we know that if we are sending all of this different communication that doesn't really coincide with real life events that the customers have, they would end up ultimately not having an ideal experience. The fourth principle was accountability and ownership, which I touched on before, but basically this time we wanted to call it out specifically. We all know that it's important to have an owner, but more often than not, it gets neglected. So we knew that by calling it out in our process, that would not be the case anymore. Fifth, channel optimization. So we offer our experience through multiple channels, but more often than not, we don't, first of all, optimize our messaging according to each channel. And at the same time, we don't really prioritize the timing of it again and how contextual they are. The sixth principle was identifying dependencies and basically considering the up and downstream effect of all of the changes that we are introducing. And lastly, we wanted to evaluate the current cadence and prioritize. For every time that we are introducing something new, we wanted to make sure that it does not conflict with any existing state, and that not only it corresponds with the holistic experience, but also on one-on-one experiences, maybe a subset of all of the experiences that we offer. So we took all of this and created a draft collaboration framework, and before we roll it out to the team, we wanted to test it to make sure that we are in fact on the right track. So the best team we found to test it was the baby monitoring team. Jenn is going to walk us through how taking that collaboration framework and applying it to releasing a new feature was like for her and the team.
So before I deep dive into our process within the baby monitor team, first I'm going to tell you about the marketing and product vision of the baby monitor. So our vision of the ecobee smart camera as a baby monitor was that it will last from your first child to your next, and ecobee customers can repurpose the camera once they outgrow the need for the baby monitor. As a company, we always thought of the ecobee smart camera as a security and home monitoring solution. However, the baby monitor allowed us to think outside of that realm. It really shifted our product focus and mindset to tailor the ecobee experience to a different subset of users, which is really touching on the growing families and new parents. The key feature in the baby monitor experience is audio monitoring. So what that essentially is, it allows customers the ability to stream audio from their baby's room through the camera to their phone, and on their phone they're able to have it locked or the ability to browse other apps and still hear the audio. So similar to Spotify or any music streaming app, you will still have the functionality to clearly hear the audio. So next I will take you through the baby monitor process. So here's the process at a glance. So based on the collaborative framework that Mahsa just took us through, you can see how we put that process into action at a larger scale. This is something we can't overly share, so you can kind of see it at a glance. In the following slides, I'll take you through the overall process and how we worked with the marketing team. So first, I'll take you through the old process. So how we used to work with product and marketing. So the PM would create a PRD. A PRD is a product requirements document that contains all the information to build and use a specific product. It's written to allow people within the organization to understand how the product should function. The PRD would then be reviewed with the UX in one meeting to begin the kickoff for the design process, and then another separate meeting with only the PM and the PMM, which is the product marketing manager, would then review the PRD. Once product was close to completion, the PMM without UX and product would then brief the marketing team prior to their kickoff. However, there was a large issue with that. The issue was prominent in our old working process that UX was not involved in critical touch points within the product's creation. There was no communication between UX and the PMM. And in some instances, this led to miscommunication, as Jackie touched on previously, around the product's functionality, and it just outlined unclear objectives needed to market the product. So our new working process is what really changed within the baby monitor project. So it started with UX research and PMM created that product requirements document together and worked closely with the development team throughout the design process. So UX and research were able to influence that document to ensure it actually aligned with the prior research done. So what changed with the marketing team was actually UX and research took the lead on the collaboration with marketing and their sub-teams. UX and research created what is called a marketing handoff brief, and we were both key stakeholders throughout the whole marketing campaign process. So the opportunity here was it really removed the throw over the fence mentality. UX wanted to help shape the overall story of how ecobee marketed this product and communicate it to customers. This allowed UX and marketing to shed the habit of being involved and only communicating within the respective teams. So what did this change mean? This involved more collaboration and more involvement and more than just the design process for UX. So UX got to work closely with the PMM, e-commerce, marketing, web team, all up until the launch and still today to the post-launch. This new process allowed our partnering teams to think of UX more holistically. So now I'll deep dive into how we did work with marketing. So the first key artifact was a marketing handoff document. So this was done in conjunction with user research. It really helped kick off the baby monitor marketing process and happened before they started their kickoff. So in that brief, we walked the marketing team through 4 key phrases that took place in the baby monitor product creation. This included market research, design research, where we found gaps within the products available in market, and how to address those gaps. And then at the end, we then walked the team through a product demo. In the following slides, I'll break down key artifacts we included in each subsection. So the first one is market research. So within the market research section, we identified our target audience, which in this case was new parents and growing families. We then analyzed what is currently offered in the market today, which included smart baby monitors and then also traditional radio frequency monitors. We then mapped out where our camera could fit into relation to what is currently offered in the market in a product fit diagram. Next phase is the design research phase. So in this phase, we conducted user interviews with a series of parents in certain subgroups. So new parents, growing families with small children who are in need of baby monitors. Once our interviews were complete, we then summarized our findings and identified key pain points that our potential customer base faced with the current product offerings in the market. Those pain points were then used to define key jobs to be done that the ecobee baby monitor had to solve. The main job to be done were passive monitoring, clear line of sight, and the ability to self-interpret. In step 3, we outlined strategic gaps and opportunities. So in this phase, we completed a competitive comparison and analysis, which broke down what the product is, what it offers, and the key features that competitive product had. We then identified gaps that those products offers, which came from our user interviews, product reviews, and analysis of the product at first hand. These gaps then helped us form the opportunities we used to create the PRD and the feature ideation in the UX process. Step 4 was a product demo. So this was essentially, we took the marketing team through the end-to-end baby mode experience from the physical product to the in-app experience. We then deep dived into the key differentiating features that the baby monitor offered. In that feature breakdown, we included a visual of the feature, a description of what it is, an example of its use case. So one of them, to touch on passive monitoring, was essentially the ability to hear my baby when my phone's in the back of my pocket when I'm doing my laundry. So the ability to multitask. We needed to solve that problem. And then what we then did was we tied each feature we illustrated to a job to be done. So this really would then help inform marketing, the story that they needed to tell in all of their materials. So it really allowed them to be aware of what they were working on and why the customer would need to be interested. It helped break down the barriers and reduce, again, the throw over the fence mentality. So now let's meet your marketing team. So the marketing team can be broken down to 4 main sub-teams: e-commerce, which handles our email communications, our digital team, which is our web, and our creative, which is art direction and our overall campaigning of a product, and then social, which is touching on our Instagram posts, Facebooks, anything to do with even touch points with influencers we may talk to. So now I'm going to deep dive into each one of those teams and how we worked. So the first team is e-commerce. So previously our collaboration with e-commerce was at the end of their creation process. So UX was primarily there to provide in-app shots to an already designed email really close to the launch date. So what we did with Baby Monitor is we really changed that. We also changed the way we target our customers. So how we reached out to our customer base. So the Smart Cameras of Baby Monitor was introduced as a continuous innovation email series that was sent out to all ecobee customers. So the initial email include new versatile features that our products offer, including features in the smart thermostat, room sensors, and of course the smart camera. So there was a subsection for the introducing baby monitors for smart cameras. And so if a customer engaged with that specific subsection of the email, we then target them with a subset of series of additional emails. So it was very much intuitively targeting our customers and not overkilling the communication as well. So if they interacted with Learn More, we then bucket them into a whole different email series that target that specific product. So how UX was involved during this process. So during the email campaign process, UX was able to work closely with e-commerce to ensure consistency between the email communications and the product experience. And UX was a key stakeholder at each email iteration, review up until launch, and we continue to be a stakeholder today as we continuously send out emails. The next team we'll be going through is the web team. So how we used to work with the web team, like Jackie mentioned, our old process was really using assets that were already created before the web team even created their wireframes. So it was really, really hard to really form the product story or even convey what the product did within those images. So what we did with the web team is we were brought into working sessions to review the layout of each page, how the content flowed, so the overall story, and provided feedback to ensure consistency between the feature description, as well as how it worked in the actual baby monitor experience. What was great about this process was no assets were created until after that story was formed. So then what we did was we were able to work with the art director and kind of give direction onto what type of imagery we needed. So we had a story to tell. We basically created a document of being like, we need this subset of images. Here are some tips of how you can take them. And of course, it's at the discretion of the art director to really influence what those images would look like. So next goes to the creative team, which touches on working with the design director as well as the art director. So UX worked closely with the art director who headed the marketing imagery creative process as well as the entire creative campaign. So in working with the art director, UX was included in storyboard creation, provided guidance for the best photo composition for the product, as you can see here, and how the baby monitor features were communicated through the imagery. So this is a great example of UX not being as a part of like this section, is that for this specific product especially, placement and mounting is very important when it comes to a child. And mommy bloggers can be really vicious in terms of tearing apart a product if the imagery or placement is incorrect, because it could harm your child. So one of our influencers that we used for our imagery had originally set the baby monitor right on the corner of the crib, and the camera has a cord. There's a lot of like things that could happen that it needs to be away from the child's reach. So what we were able to do is we saw this imagery in like kind of like a test review as well. And what we were able to do was I worked with the design director to essentially lead the influencer to move the camera, but also show an example of how they should mount it in order to do the imagery correctly. Next, we worked with the social team. So this is very much at the end, whenever all of our assets were created. We worked very closely with them to ensure when the launch date happened, everything was lined up for them to just grab assets and go and post them onto social. So this team creates all the social postings. They form connections with our social media influencers that we actually use throughout our whole marketing campaign. And this was a new process for us as well. So we ended up forming really great relationships. We had real people using our products, so they didn't seem forced. They seemed natural in the space as well. So while working with the social team, UX was able to provide guidance on how the influencers should capture their baby monitor experience within their respective platforms. So those platforms could include Instagram posts, stories, Facebook posts, and of course, the mommy blogs. So how this was impactful was working directly with the social team to help ensure all posts, stories were true to the baby monitor's functionality and the communication of the product. So the key touch points within this whole process can be broken down into 4 subsections. So the involvement. So it was really UX and research that were brought on as key stakeholders throughout the end-to-end market creation of the baby monitor. So the first one is, of course, that marketing handoff brief. So UX and UR presented the marketing handoff brief to the team. So where we reviewed user research, interviews, and gaps in the market, and then highlighted how our product would help solve the jobs to be done. The next was the marketing creative kickoff. So bringing together UX, digital, branding, marketing, and all those sub-teams to understand the objectives of the product and connect the teams who are working on those assets. The next point was the midpoint review. So this is when we reviewed the first round of assets from the web, emails, even the in-app designs, and also our first round of imagery that came back from the influencers. And that's where we were able to capture that wrong product placement. The next was the final review before the launch. So we reviewed all the finalized materials and the channels they were going out on before the release. We did this quite a few weeks before, just in case anything that came up. And we have learned from our past process that we needed a certain amount of time to be able to catch anything and to be able to improve. So what these key touch points provided was alignment across all the teams, and it really saved us a lot of time and worry close to our launch. It was probably our least stressful launch we've had, or at least from like our experience, and that was honestly probably the best feeling. So how did we do? So since the smart camera as a baby monitor launched in February of this year, we have had 15 times more web searches than the ecobee smart camera. Our click-through rate has increased by five times, and the baby monitor accounts now for 27% of all new smart camera purchases. So where did we run these campaigns? So we ran a robust marketing campaign through Facebook, Instagram, Pinterest, Google, and StackAdapt. And now Armin's going to take you through how we changed within our organization.
Thanks, Jen. Okay, so great. We didn't mess this up. How do we continue the positive momentum to make sure that we're able to have a louder voice for UX? So some initial changes from a organizational perspective. First, management buy-in. Great, that's fantastic. They see the ROI. We're making sure that we're able to speak both on a design perspective and a business perspective, so there's a value for us, right? We made sure to keep that in so they're willing to let us experiment and try more things. Secondly, what we're able to see from a social perspective is that because we were able to do kind of a classic change management thing in the sense of identify a small sliver, make sure you do that well and start branching out from there, is that throughout the other teams, they've now repeatedly mentioned, okay, well, I want it to be like baby mode. Make it like baby mode. This is how the new launch needs to be. So it's now the gold standard. And folks know that we will have more positive results if we involve UX from the end-to-end process. Touched upon this one already, but the overall amplified value of UX. So we're thinking past just the actual exploration, scope, pushing pixels, what can I actually do? It's how do we actually get involved in the overall business processes? And then lastly, the end-to-end ownership, which would kind of be the expansion of the role of a UX designer in this particular organization. So these are the changes that we're noticing so far over the past couple of months in the organization, which I'm sure are going to change a little bit more. But with all this being said, there's a couple key takeaways that we were just hoping to leave everyone with, since this, I guess, is more of a case study rather than a aspirational talk. So first, it would be the thoughts for your team. Generally speaking, exploration, research, the actual design, and the development and testing are the parts that we're heavily involved in. So my question to everybody here would be, okay, can we actually do more? Can you actively address the marketing part, the selling, oh, sorry, Jack, the next slide, packaging and installation, and providing services as well. So can you go beyond past just the traditional scope to provide more value for your organization? And are you holding yourself back? And from a team's overall perspective, we do have some key takeaways as well. So for the first key takeaway, pose the problem as a challenging question or an experiment. That's all we're trying to do. This isn't supposed to be a top-down forced method. We're collaboratively working as a team. Let's make sure that we can push out what we're doing, and we're trying to be as optimistic as possible. I think Mahsa touched upon this one quite well, and I really do want to reiterate it as well. Don't overlook the QA and CS teams. Their insight and feedback is incredibly valuable. Talk to them as early as you possibly can. And from an overall organizational process, it's a lot better when you have buy-in. You've already circled it with everybody. You've socialized it, and the actual meeting suggesting the respective approach is just the rubber stamp. One key takeaway as well here, which we probably should have mentioned, our VP at the time, John Hayes, he was kind enough to just give us free reign. So I would also say have a champion in your organization, which allows you to be a little bit more creative than you would normally be allowed to. So in terms of your second takeaway, from a customer journey mapping perspective, which Mahsa alluded to as well, make sure that although the scope is identified and it can be multiple phases of the awareness all the way to advocacy journey, pick the specific scope that you want to and just go down there first. Because if you try and tackle everything all at once, you're probably going to lose more hair. And I mean, I don't need to lose any more hair, as you can clearly see. So don't bite off more than you can chew, but just be very realistic, but also at the same time, once you make some improvements, it'll be gaining momentum. You'll have the opportunity to expand further than that. So back on the sliver component, and obviously, as alluded to earlier as well, from the customer journey map perspective, it's important to just go beyond the surface level information. And this was something that Mahsa alluded to, but Jenn also really showed the actual execution of this when we're actually talking to marketing and our respective counterparts. Because if we go past the surface level and really identify the issues, what it is that we're hoping to actually communicate, the story builds itself. We know exactly what it is that we're supposed to discuss and why. And from a third takeaway perspective, this is more of an organizational takeaway, if you will. So first is Conway's Law. For those unfamiliar with it, it's essentially that the natural breaking or organization within your org is shifting to your product. Like, let's say, for example, I have a product that is split between a buyer and seller journey. I have one team working on buyer, one team working on seller. There's going to be a natural fracture there because the different teams own different things and they may not necessarily communicate with one another to the ideal specificity that we'd like. From a team's perspective, always ask how we can improve. Our current VP that we all report into, Greg Fike, does a really good job of this as well in terms of setting a very high bar, making sure that it's very aspirational and we don't kind of just settle for what's best. From an overall perspective, really focus on addressing themes and the principles component, which Mahsa alluded to earlier, was also incredibly important for us because it really steered us from a decision-making perspective, because we clearly knew what was important to us and how we had to make these decisions. So by already knowing which way we were going to bias or lean towards, it kind of helped the conversation move forward and allowed us to make quicker decisions rather than pontificate on it and have the opportunity pass by, if you will. And lastly, just if it's not apparent, we figured this would be the most important thing to reiterate: establish UX as a key stakeholder throughout the marketing project. Can't overstate that. We're not just some individual that should randomly be consulted on the side and lose valuable feedback. It's incredibly important for us to be there. And if you can also have one individual on your team that knows the product incredibly well, be the end-to-end owner throughout that entire phase, it's incredibly invaluable, and the quality of the work will speak for itself. Lastly, this one could be a bit contentious. Agile certainly is all the rage, but it should be evaluated to see that if you're actually repeating mistakes for the sake of just moving quickly, is there an element of a standardized process which your organization can actually benefit from? So by having that, you're able to think through things, learn from your mistakes, make everything consistently better from an incremental perspective. So with that being said, from the rest of the team and myself, thank you very much for listening to us talk. And does anyone have any questions that we can answer?